What happens when you truly understand what being one with God is not something dramatic on the outside, but something profoundly transformative on the inside. The first thing that falls away is the belief that God is distant, separate, or occasionally available. You begin to perceive that the divine is not somewhere you must reach, but the very life you are already living. This realization gently dissolves fear, striving, and spiritual ambition, because you see that nothing needs to be added to you for God to be present. Awareness replaces effort, and knowing replaces hoping. As this understanding deepens, the sense of separation that once defined your identity begins to fade. You no longer experience yourself as a small, isolated being trying to access divine power. Instead, you recognize that the life expressing itself as you is the same life that animates all creation. This shift changes how you pray, how you think, and how you respond to challenges. Prayer becomes less about asking and more about listening. Thought becomes quieter, less reactive and more receptive. You stop telling God what to do and start trusting what is already being done through divine intelligence. With this awareness comes an inner stillness that cannot be manufactured by discipline or force. It arises naturally when the mind ceases its constant commentary and rests in spiritual knowing. In this stillness, guidance is not dramatic or loud, it is simple, clear and peaceful. Decisions unfold without strain. Direction emerges without anxiety. You begin to notice that life itself is moving with wisdom, and you are included in that movement, not separate from it. Living from this oneness changes the way you act in the world. Actions are no longer driven by fear, lack, or the need to prove worth. They flow from an inner alignment with divine order. You may still work, plan, and engage fully with life, but the burden of personal responsibility lifts. You realize that you are not the source of power, but the transparency through which power operates. This understanding brings humility without weakness and confidence without ego. As this consciousness becomes natural, harmony expresses itself in the body, the mind, and daily circumstances. Healing is no longer seen as a miracle that might happen, but as a natural adjustment that occurs when resistance to divine life dissolves. Peace replaces inner conflict. Compassion replaces judgment. You find yourself responding to others not from emotional reaction but from spiritual clarity, seeing beyond appearances to the same divine presence expressing as them. Ultimately, understanding oneness with God is the quiet surrender of the personal sense of self into universal being. It is not the loss of identity, but the discovery of true identity. You no longer live as someone trying to reach God, you live as one through whom God is living. In that realization, life becomes simpler, deeper, and filled with a gentle assurance that all is unfolding exactly as it should. When you truly understand that oneness with God is a present reality and not a future achievement, the entire structure of spiritual striving begins to dissolve. Most people live with the assumption that God must be reached, earned, persuaded, or accessed through effort, discipline, or moral perfection. This belief places God in the future and the individual in a constant state of becoming. The mind is always reaching forward, hoping that one day it will arrive at a moment of closeness, peace, or divine approval. But the realization of oneness reveals something radically different. There was never a distance to cross. God is not waiting at the end of spiritual progress. God is the very consciousness aware of the progress itself. This understanding shifts attention away from time. The moment you stop postponing God to tomorrow, prayer changes from desire into recognition. Instead of saying, "Someday I will be closer to God," awareness quietly acknowledges, "There is no place where God is not." This does not inflate the personal self, it dissolves it. The ego thrives on future attainment because it survives on lack. Oneness exposes lack as an illusion created by separation thinking. When you see that divine life is already expressing as your awareness, your breath, your intelligence, the hunger to become spiritual softens and gives way to spiritual being. Living in this realization does not make life passive or indifferent. It removes anxiety from effort. You still grow, learn, and mature, but not in order to reach God. Growth becomes the natural unfolding of divine life expressing itself more clearly. You stop measuring yourself against spiritual ideals and start resting in spiritual fact. The need to compare, judge, or condemn yourself weakens because perfection is no longer a personal standard to meet but a divine presence to recognize. This present reality of oneness also redefines faith. Faith is no longer belief in something unseen or distant. It becomes a quiet trust in what is already operative. You begin to sense that intelligence is functioning before you think, that order is present before you plan, that love is active before you try to generate it. This brings a deep inner assurance that does not depend on external circumstances. Even when situations appear uncertain, the foundation beneath them feels stable because it is not built on outcomes but on being. Understanding oneness as now also changes how you face challenges. Problems are no longer signs of spiritual failure or absence. They are seen as temporary appearances within an infinite presence. Instead of asking why God has not arrived, the mind becomes still enough to perceive how divine wisdom is already at work within the situation. This removes desperation and replaces it with calm expectancy, not for something to happen, but for something to be revealed. As this awareness deepens, spiritual life becomes simple. There is less effort to control outcomes and more willingness to let life unfold from within divine order. You begin each moment not by reaching for God, but by acknowledging God as the life of the moment itself, the awareness reading these words, the silence between thoughts, the intelligence animating existence itself. When you begin to truly grasp the reality of being one with God, the sense of separation that has long defined your consciousness begins to fade, and a new awareness emerges, one that fundamentally changes how you perceive yourself and the world. Most of humanity functions under the assumption that there is a division between the individual and the divine, between the finite self and infinite power. This sense of separation creates struggle, striving, and the constant effort to reach, or in God. It places the divine outside of personal experience, as though it was something distant, conditional, or only occasionally accessible. Understanding oneness shatters this illusion. You begin to recognize that the divine is not somewhere else, waiting for you to climb a ladder of discipline, morality, or achievement. The reality is that God is already present, not as a concept, not as a possibility, but as the very life expressing as your awareness, your thoughts, and your being. Once this is realized, the fear and tension that arise from feeling separate simply dissolve. With the recognition of this unity, a shift occurs in how you approach life. The mind, which has been trained to perceive itself as a separate agent struggling to manipulate circumstances, gradually relaxes. You start to notice that the same energy, intelligence, and creative power operating in the universe is operating through you. Challenges are no longer personal battles to win or threats to survive, they become opportunities to align with a greater intelligence already at work. The sense of constant striving fades because you understand that nothing outside of you determines the flow of divine life. This understanding doesn't make you passive or detached from reality, it makes you active in a higher sense, where actions are not driven by fear, lack, or ego, but by the natural expression of divine intelligence through your life. As separation dissolves, your perception of relationships, circumstances, and events transforms. No longer are people seen merely as separate individuals with their own agendas. They are recognized as expressions of the same divine consciousness that animates you. Conflicts lose their sting because there is no longer the illusion of opposing forces. Instead, you see life as a unified field in which all experiences are interconnected and purposeful. This awareness fosters compassion, patience, and a sense of profound peace, because you are no longer battling against what is, but participating consciously in what already is. This shift also deeply influences inner dialogue. Thoughts that once reinforced division, judgment, or self-doubt begin to dissolve naturally. You notice that much of human anxiety comes from believing in separation, from thinking that you are alone in facing life's challenges. When the veil of separation lifts, the mind experiences freedom. Decisions are no longer reactive, they emerge from clarity, intuition, and a sense of alignment with divine order. Inner conflict is replaced with harmony, and instead of trying to manipulate life to fit personal desires, you begin to move with the natural flow of what is already being orchestrated. Ultimately, understanding the end of separation and the birth of spiritual awareness transforms every facet of existence. You are no longer struggling to connect with God, because you see that God has never been apart from you. This awareness is not something to achieve, it is the unveiling of a truth that has always existed, the recognition that all of life, every thought, every heartbeat, and every circumstance is an expression of one continuous divine presence, of which you are an inseparable part. When you begin to experience true oneness with God, you discover that inner stillness is not just a pleasant state of mind, but the very doorway to divine guidance. Most people live their lives in constant mental and emotional activity, believing that solutions, inspiration, and direction must come from external sources or from forceful personal effort. The mind is always planning, analyzing, and reacting, and while it achieves many things on a practical level, it often misses the deeper guidance that comes from aligning with the life that animates all creation. Stillness is the threshold where this deeper intelligence becomes perceptible. It is not an escape from life, nor is it a denial of challenges. Rather, it is a conscious withdrawal from the noise and distraction of the separate self, allowing the awareness of God, which is ever present, to shine clearly. In this stillness, the ego relaxes and the compulsion to control diminishes. You no longer feel the urgent need to manipulate circumstances to produce desired outcomes, because you begin to sense that life itself is intelligent, and that guidance is continuously available when the mind and heart are quiet enough to receive it. This stillness functions like a clear lens. Without it, divine guidance is distorted by fear, doubt, and habitual thought patterns. When the mind is quiet, insights appear spontaneously, often in simple, subtle ways. A solution might emerge as a thought that feels completely natural, a decision that seems obvious, or an inner knowing that cannot be explained but carries undeniable certainty. These are not random occurrences, they are the result of aligning with the infinite intelligence already working in every moment. Living in this awareness also transforms your perception of obstacles. Problems no longer seem insurmountable or frightening, because you realize that guidance is always available, and that inner stillness allows you to access it. Instead of reacting impulsively or out of fear, you learn to pause, breathe, and create a space where clarity can emerge. Decisions are made from a place of spiritual attunement rather than from anxiety, and actions flow effortlessly because they are supported by wisdom beyond the personal mind. This does not eliminate responsibility or effort, but it changes the source from which action arises. Effort becomes cooperative rather than combative, aligned with a higher intelligence rather than attempting to force results through limited understanding. Stillness also fosters a profound sense of trust. When you cease the constant mental chatter, you begin to perceive that life is unfolding perfectly, and that guidance is present for every step. You realize that fear, worry, and resistance are products of a mind disconnected from its divine source, and that letting go of these allows insight and inspiration to flow naturally. Over time, this awareness deepens and stillness becomes not merely a practice, but the very condition from which life is experienced. Guidance is no longer sought as something external, it is recognized as an intimate, ever-present reality that emerges when you stop striving and allow yourself to be receptive. Ultimately, inner stillness is the doorway through which the wisdom and love of God move into expression in your life. It is in this quiet, receptive state that true guidance is felt, decisions are made with clarity, and the harmony of divine presence is realized in every action, every thought, and every moment of being. When you truly understand what it means to be one with God, you begin to live from divine consciousness rather than from human effort, and this is a transformative shift in every aspect of your existence. Most people operate from a sense of self that believes it must generate life, power, and success through sheer determination, planning, or struggle. From this perspective, achievement is the result of personal skill, knowledge, or persistence, and life can feel heavy, uncertain, and full of tension because the individual carries the burden of making things happen. But when you awaken to the awareness of oneness, you realize that the life within you is not separate from the infinite intelligence and energy that sustains all things. What you are doing is not just your effort alone, it is the activity of a divine presence expressing through your awareness. This recognition changes the foundation of action from striving to flowing, from trying to allowing. Living from divine consciousness does not mean inaction or passivity, it means that every choice, word, and action emerges from a place of alignment with the universal intelligence rather than from personal fear, ambition, or limitation. You begin to notice that when you operate from this state, your efforts are more effective, more harmonious, and more creatively productive than when driven solely by the will of the separate self. Tasks that once felt burdensome begin to unfold naturally, as though the path itself is guiding you. You experience a sense of ease in action that comes not from controlling circumstances but from moving in concert with a higher power that orchestrates everything in perfect order. This shift also redefines how you understand success and failure. From the perspective of human effort, mistakes and setbacks are evidence of inadequacy or lack of control. But living from divine consciousness reframes these experiences. They become signals of alignment or misalignment, opportunities to adjust your awareness and continue acting in harmony with the greater flow. You no longer fight life or resist its currents, because you perceive that life itself is intelligent, and that every situation carries within it the potential for growth, clarity, and solution. The anxiety of making things happen is replaced with trust that the creative intelligence animating all existence is already at work in every circumstance, including your own efforts. As you continue to live from divine consciousness, your internal life changes as well. Thoughts become clearer, emotions settle, and intuition sharpens. You are less likely to be swayed by fear, doubt, or impatience because the source from which you act is larger than the personal mind. Decisions are not made reactively or from a need to prove yourself, but with an inner knowing that guides effortlessly toward the right expression at the right time. You notice that the flow of life seems to carry you rather than resist you, and that obstacles are rarely permanent, they are simply part of the rhythm through which divine intelligence expresses solution and harmony. Ultimately, living from divine consciousness is the natural state of being when you recognize your inseparable connection with God. Effort is no longer the struggle of a separate self, it is the intelligent activity of the divine operating through your awareness. Life becomes lighter, clearer, and more joyful because you are no longer dependent on your own limited understanding to navigate it. Instead, you are living in partnership with the infinite, expressing creation itself through every thought, word, and deed. This understanding is not merely theoretical, it transforms the quality of your existence, aligning every action with the life and intelligence that sustains all things. When you come to truly understand oneness with God, healing and harmony begin to appear naturally in your life, not as something you must force or achieve, but as the spontaneous outcome of aligning with divine presence. Most people believe that health, peace, and well-being are things to be earned or secured through effort, medication, or external circumstances, but the deeper reality is that these qualities are inherent in the life that already exists within you. The mind has long been trained to see separation, conflict, and limitation as inevitable, but recognizing oneness shifts that perception completely. You begin to understand that the body, the mind, and every aspect of your existence are expressions of the same infinite intelligence that sustains the universe, and when resistance, doubt, and fear are released, the natural state of balance emerges effortlessly. This understanding transforms the way you perceive illness, struggle, and discord. Instead of viewing problems as permanent or as personal failings, you begin to see them as temporary distortions of awareness, appearing only because attention has been drawn away from the life that is always perfect and whole. Healing is not something to be begged for or willed into existence. It is the natural unfolding of divine life as soon as you allow it to flow without interference. When the mind stops affirming separation and the heart ceases clinging to conflict, harmony expresses itself in the body, in relationships, and in circumstances. You notice that peace is not a reward but the very fabric of existence, waiting to be acknowledged rather than manufactured. Living in this understanding also changes your response to the external world. Conflicts that once caused anxiety or tension are now met with calm clarity. The realization of oneness allows you to perceive situations from the perspective of divine intelligence rather than reacting from fear or desire. Relationships shift as well. The recognition that every being is an expression of the same life you are diminishes judgment, criticism, and emotional turbulence. Compassion arises naturally because you are no longer seeing others as separate opponents or sources of stress, but as fellow expressions of divine harmony. In this state, every interaction becomes an opportunity to reflect the peace and balance that exists within. The process of healing and harmony is not limited to physical health or emotional stability. It extends into the realm of thought and consciousness. Ideas that once caused inner conflict or confusion are clarified, and the mental noise that perpetuates stress diminishes. Intuition strengthens, providing guidance in alignment with the universal order. Decisions flow with ease, and the sense of struggle that once accompanied effort diminishes because the awareness of life operating through you replaces the belief in personal limitation. Ultimately, healing and harmony are not external accomplishments or future promises. They are the natural expression of life itself when it is recognized and accepted as inseparable from divine presence. As you live in this awareness, you experience a profound sense of ease, balance, and wholeness. What was once sought through effort is now realized through recognition, and the life you inhabit reflects the peace, order, and vitality that have always been your true inheritance. This understanding transforms existence from one of struggle into a continuous unfolding of grace and well-being, demonstrating that harmony is not earned but remembered, and healing is simply the recognition of the perfection that has always been present. When you truly understand oneness with God, you realize that surrendering the personal self to the universal presence is not a loss, but the ultimate discovery of your true identity. Most people live their lives identifying with the separate I, the ego-driven sense of self that believes it must control, achieve, and manipulate circumstances to survive or thrive. This personal self clings to power, recognition, and security, constantly measuring itself against others and against imagined standards. It fears loss, change, and the unknown because it believes that its existence is limited, fragile, and dependent on external conditions. Surrendering this self does not mean giving up life, ambition, or purpose. Rather, it means releasing the belief that life is dependent upon the efforts and limitations of the individual mind. It is the quiet recognition that the life expressing as you is not separate from the life of God, that the very awareness you call I is already the presence of the infinite. In surrendering, you begin to see that all striving, all worry, and all tension arise from resisting this truth. The ego fights for security, control, and recognition because it senses that its separate existence is fragile. When you release that struggle, a profound freedom emerges. Life is no longer a battleground between what is desired and what is feared. Instead, it becomes a cooperative flow between the individual and the infinite. Every action, every decision, every interaction is guided by intelligence and presence rather than by anxiety, doubt, or the compulsion to prove oneself. In this surrender, you do not cease to act, but your actions are no longer reactive or self-centered. They are the natural expressions of divine life moving through you. Surrender also transforms the way you experience challenges. Circumstances that once provoked fear or resistance now become opportunities to trust and align with the greater presence that is always at work. You realize that difficulties are not threats to your well-being, but invitations to recognize that divine life is sufficient and complete. This understanding allows you to approach every moment with calm assurance, knowing that the presence of God is not conditional or dependent on external outcomes. Decisions are no longer stressful exercises in control, they become opportunities to allow wisdom and love to express through you. As the personal self yields, a deeper sense of identity emerges. You no longer define yourself by achievements, failures, possessions, or opinions. Instead, you recognize yourself as the expression of the eternal, inseparable from the creative, sustaining, and harmonious life that governs all existence. This identity brings with it peace, confidence, and joy, because it is not vulnerable to circumstances or limited by human perception. You no longer seek life outside of yourself because you realize that life itself is already within, flowing through you in every breath, every thought, and every moment of awareness. Ultimately, surrendering the personal self to the universal presence is the gateway to living fully and freely in divine alignment. It is the recognition that the self you thought you were never needed to carry the weight of life alone. By letting go of the illusion of separation, you step into the reality that you are one with God, and in that oneness all fear, limitation, and striving dissolve. What remains is a life of effortless harmony, clarity, and grace, where every moment is lived in intimate union with the infinite presence that has always been your true self. When we reflect on the understanding of being one with God, we come to realize that this is not a distant ideal or a goal to be achieved in some future time. It is the very reality of our present existence. Most people live their lives believing in separation, striving to reach God, to earn divine favor, or to control outcomes through personal effort. This mindset has created a world of struggle, conflict, and fear, because it positions the finite self against the infinite, the temporal against the eternal. Yet, when we truly awaken to oneness, we discover that God is not somewhere outside of us, waiting to be attained, but the very life that animates our every thought, every breath, and every circumstance. This awareness transforms everything, because it replaces striving with recognition, anxiety with trust, and limitation with infinite possibility. Understanding oneness begins with seeing that God is present in the now. There is no waiting, no distant goal, no someday when divine presence will be accessible. The moment we realize this, effort is replaced by awareness, and the need to reach, control, or manipulate life falls away. Life is no longer a series of struggles or achievements. It becomes a continuous expression of the infinite presence that has always been working through us. This alone brings profound peace, because we recognize that everything necessary for life, for guidance, for well-being, is already present within and around us. The dissolution of separation is perhaps the most powerful shift that occurs in this understanding. When we no longer see ourselves as isolated beings fighting to survive or succeed, we begin to perceive life as a unified field of intelligence and love. Fear diminishes, judgment softens, and compassion naturally arises. We see others not as competitors or threats, but as fellow expressions of the same divine presence, and every interaction becomes an opportunity to reflect harmony and understanding. In this state, inner peace is no longer a distant hope, it becomes a natural reflection of reality itself. Inner stillness emerges as the doorway to guidance. When the mind quiets and the ego relaxes, we begin to sense the intelligence that governs all life. Decisions are not frantic or forced, they arise naturally from clarity and alignment. Challenges are met with confidence because we no longer rely solely on personal strength, but on the life that is already guiding, sustaining, and harmonizing every situation. Action flows with ease, inspiration comes effortlessly, and the burden of trying to control outcomes is lifted. Living from divine consciousness rather than human effort brings harmony to all aspects of existence. Healing is natural, relationships flourish, and the mind experiences clarity. The surrender of the personal self to the universal presence is not a loss of identity, but the discovery of true identity. We realize that the I we once clung to was never separate from God, and by letting go of illusion, we step into a life of grace, effortless guidance, and profound peace. Ultimately, understanding oneness with God transforms life completely. It is not about acquiring power, knowledge, or favor. It is about recognizing what has always been true, that we are one with the infinite, inseparable from divine presence, and eternally supported in every moment. In this realization, fear dissolves, struggle ends, and life unfolds as a harmonious expression of love, wisdom, and joy. To live in oneness is to live in freedom, clarity, and profound alignment with the eternal source of all life, and in this awakening, every moment becomes an opportunity to experience the fullness of divine presence flowing effortlessly through us.